After Star Wars was released, it became apparent that my story, however many films it took to tell, was only one of thousands that could be told about the characters who inhabited its galaxy. But these were not the stories that I was destined to tell. Instead, they would spring from the imagination of other writers, inspired by the glimpse of a galaxy that Star Wars provided. Today, it is an amazing, if unexpected, legacy of Star Wars that so many gifted writers are contributing new stories to that saga. George Lucas, from the introduction of A Splinters of the Mind's Eye, 1996. Hello there, and welcome back to the Skywalker Files from a certain point of view. I'm your host, Rockwell, your faithful guide through the tangled, occasionally tragic, and often surprisingly bureaucratic corridors of the expanded universe. Today, we continue our journey into the Jedi Quest series, that wonderful era when Anakin Skywalker still had a braid, Obi-Wan Kenobi still had hope, and neither of them had yet discovered the wonders of lava-based property disputes. Our story this time is Jedi Quest: The Trail of the Jedi, a novella by Jude Watson, published in 2002. It's short, sharp, and much like Obi-Wan's patience, constantly on the verge of collapse. Despite being a brief adventure, it offers one of the clearest looks at the early dynamic between Master and Padawan, a relationship built on mutual respect, constant miscommunication, and just a dash of emotional repression. Set between the way of the Apprentice and the dangerous games, this story captures the quiet, in-between moments of the Clone Wars prelude, when the galaxy is still at peace, and the biggest conflict Anakin faces is yet his own impatience. The Trail of the Jedi takes us on a mission that is, on the surface, a simple Jedi training exercise, which, as everyone familiar with the Jedi can tell you, is basically code for someone's going to get stranded, emotionally compromised, or nearly killed. But beneath the lightsabers and traps, this story is really about what makes the Jedi bond so fascinating. That impossible mix of mentorship, love, frustration, and fear. Jude Watson excels at these things. The small, emotional skirmishes, the kind that show the cracks beginning to form long before any galactic empire rises to fill them. So grab your training saber and your copy of the Jedi Code, because we're headed back into the field where lessons are hard-earned, tempers are short, and the Trail of the Jedi might just lead somewhere neither Master nor Padawan expects. Jedi Quest: The Trail of the Jedi was first published in 2002 by Scholastic at the height of the prequel era, when Star Wars was expanding not only on screen, but across an ever-growing constellation of young Jedi reader novels. This particular story was released as a short prequel novella to the main Jedi Quest series, designed to bridge the gap between the way of the Apprentice and the dangerous games. Its author, Jude Watson, was particularly the chronicler of the Jedi Order during this era. Between her work on the Jedi Apprentice, the Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan series, and Jedi Quest, Obi-Wan and Anakin, Watson wrote over 40 novels exploring the inner lives of the Jedi, their fears, failures, and their quiet tragedies that the films only ever hint at. Her particular strength lies in restraint. She understands that the most compelling part of Star Wars isn't always the galactic scale of war, but the human cost of discipline, loyalty, and emotion. And in the Trail of the Jedi, she narrows that focus down even further, giving us a story that's less about lightsaber duels and more about the uneasy rhythm between teacher and student. In terms of timeline, the story sits comfortably between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. It's a few years into Anakin's apprenticeship, that murky stretch of time when the galaxy appears calm, but anyone paying attention can feel the slow drift towards something darker. The Republic is still intact. The Clone Wars are years away, and yet, even here, the cracks are beginning to show. The Jedi Order is confident, perhaps too confident, and its youngest apprentice is already testing the limits of obedience. So while the Trail of the Jedi may read like a modest adventure, it exists at a crucial narrative space, the calm before the storm, when the seeds of distrust, pride, and fear are just starting to take root. And much like the Jedi themselves, the story's power lies not in what it shouts, but in what it quietly implies, that destiny has already begun its slow, inevitable march. The Jedi Quest series has always been, at its core, a two-person show. There are other faces, of course, fleeting allies, local troublemakers, the occasional droid who deserves a raise. But in the Trail of the Jedi, it's all about the uneasy partnership between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. At this point in the timeline, Obi-Wan is still settling into his uncomfortable role of Master. He's not quite the composed general we'll later meet in the Clone Wars, more like a young man pretending to be wise while quietly panicking under his robes. He's doing his best to live up to the impossible standard left by Qui-Gon, a mentor who was simultaneously rebellious and serene, something Obi-Wan has not quite mastered. He's determined to train Anakin by the book, even if the book in question is currently being set on fire by his Padawan's creativity. Watson portrays him beautifully here, a man torn between affection and frustration, between the patience the Jedi preach and the very human exasperation of raising a prodigy who doesn't like listening. Every choice Obi-Wan makes in this story is colored by fear. Not fear of the dark side, but fear of failure. Anakin, meanwhile, is still in that wide-eyed, impulsive phase of his Jedi training. A boy whose raw power is matched only by his deep insecurity. He knows he's different. He knows he's gifted, but he doesn't yet know what to do with that knowledge or how to carry the weight of it. In the Trail of the Jedi, Anakin's defining trait is his impatience. He's always in a hurry to prove himself, to win approval, to find shortcuts to mastery. And of course, that impatience is exactly what keeps him from truly learning. Watson captures him as more human than mythic, less chosen one, more teenager who refuses to ask for directions. But beneath the frustration lies something deeper, a longing to be trusted, to be seen as capable. You can almost feel how much he wants Obi-Wan's respect, even when he's doing everything possible not to earn it. Though he never appears directly, the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn looms over the story like a benevolent, slightly judgmental ghost. His influence defines the emotional space between Master and Apprentice. Obi-Wan is still trying to teach as Qui-Gon would have wanted, and Anakin is still trying to live up to the promise Qui-Gon saw in him. It's that unspoken triangle that gives the story its tension. Every disagreement between Obi-Wan and Anakin feels like a conversation with someone who isn't there, a man whose faith in both of them hangs like an unfinished lesson. Because this is a tightly focused novella, side characters are minimal. The environment itself, the traps, the isolation, the looming sense of danger, functions as other characters. The planet tests them but more importantly, it mirrors them, full of potential hazards disguised as opportunities. Together, Obi-Wan and Anakin form the perfect paradox. One seeks control, the other freedom. One fears emotion, the other runs to it. And yet, for all their friction, there's love here. Buried under the lectures, the eye rolls, quietly holding the bond together. In short, the Trial of the Jedi isn't just a training story. It's a two-person study in the slow unraveling of trust, told with the warmth of a mentor and the impulsive energy of a student who has no idea that he's already halfway to legend. Our story begins in what is supposed to be a simple training mission. And as you've no doubt noticed, when a Jedi says that, it's the narrative equivalent of a red alert. Obi-Wan Kenobi has brought his Padawan, Anakin Skywalker, to the world of Ragoon 6, a remote, unspoiled planet that has remained largely untouched by civilization. The planet itself is breathtaking, but hostile. Jagged cliffs, deep ravines, and a sense of isolation that seems tailor-made for introspection. Or disaster. The purpose of this mission is straightforward enough. It's a trust exercise. A way for Master and Apprentice to strengthen their bond after a string of disagreements and emotional misfires. Their task is to track another Jedi, named Ren, who is serving as the core of the training scenario designed to test the teamwork and resourcefulness. In theory, it's the perfect environment for this exercise. No distractions, no politics, no galactic crisis. Just two Jedi, one Corey, and a planet that looks like a hiking brochure for people who hate comfort. Obi-Wan, ever the patient instructor, hopes the exercise and experience will help Anakin learn cooperation, focus, and the subtle art of not charging ahead without a plan. Anakin, meanwhile, sees it as an opportunity to prove his independence, and more importantly, his superiority. The early stages of this mission go more or less as planned. They pick up traces of Ren's movements, follow his trail across the planet's rocky terrain, and engage in some mild bickering about methods and priorities. You know, typical bonding behavior for the Jedi and his hormonal apprentice. But before long, things take a sharp turn off the rails. The pair discovers that someone else is on the planet, and they're not playing by the Jedi's rules. A group of bounty hunters has entered the picture, and they're not here for the training exercise. They're here for a hunt. Suddenly, the scenario shifts from the simulated to life-threatening. Obi-Wan and Anakin must not only locate Ren, but rescue him before the hunters can close in. The tone pivots from philosophical to survivalist, and the serene wilderness of Ragoon 6 becomes a dangerous chessboard. Watson turns the setup into a test of trust under fire. Obi-Wan has to rely on Anakin's instincts, the very thing he's been trying to temper, while Anakin must finally learn the meaning of cooperation. The threat of the bounty hunter strips away the training wheels. They are forced to act not as teacher and student, but as partners. The story's tension lies in watching that transformation happen. Anakin's confident, which often reads as arrogant. It becomes essential to their survival, however. Obi-Wan's discipline, which is so often feels stifling to his Padawan, becomes their anchor. For once, their differences complement rather than collide. By the time they've rescued Ren and escaped Ragoon 6, both Jedi have changed, subtly but meaningfully. They've faced real danger together, and in doing so, they've begun to understand what true trust requires. Not agreement, but faith. It's a victory earned the hard way, and is often the case in this era, one that won't last forever. But for now, on a quiet and deadly world far from Coruscant, Master and Apprentice manage something rare: balance. At first glance, the Trail of the Jedi reads like a simple survival story. Two Jedi, one wild planet, and a group of bounty hunters who've clearly taken the wrong job. But beneath the blaster fire and the cliffside tension, Jude Watson exploring something far more intimate, the fragile mechanics of trust between two people who want the same thing, but in utterly different ways. At its core, the Trail of the Jedi is about trust under duress, the kind forged not through lessons or lectures, but through shared danger. It's one thing to talk about the Force and the safety of the temple. It's another to rely on it when it's your life on the line. Watson's tone remains brisk and accessible, but it carries an undercurrent of melancholy. There's an almost prophetic sadness in watching Obi-Wan and Anakin learn how to rely on each other, knowing where that bond will ultimately lead. Every moment of connection is tinged with inevitability, a foreshadowing of a separation to come. And that's what makes this story so quietly powerful. It's not about victory or heroism. It's about two Jedi learning for a fleeting moment to move in sync, to trust, to listen, to protect one another. It's a rare occasion where everything goes wrong and somehow they get it right. It's a small, human story. But then again, that's where Star Wars is often at its best. For a story that runs barely a few hundred pages, The Trail of the Jedi packs a surprising emotional punch. At first glance, the straightforward training mission, track Ren, practice cooperation, survive a few traps, yet under Jude Watson's careful pen, it becomes something far more resonant, a study in trust, risk, and the fragile threads that bind Master and Padawan together. What makes the story stand out in the Jedi Quest series isn't its action. Though the bounty hunters certainly provide tension, it's emotional clarity. Watson doesn't need grand battles or galaxy-shattering events to make a point. She shows us two characters learning to rely on each other, and in doing so, foreshadows the triumphs and tragedies that will define their futures. Obi-Wan's steady discipline and Anakin's brash impulsiveness clash and coalesce in a way that feels authentic and earned. Every obstacle on Rangoon 6, every perilous cliff, every moment of separation is a small test, not just of survival, but of the very bond that will one day make them legends. And here's the delicious irony. What begins as a trust-building exercise ends up being a literal life or death scenario. The galaxy's sense of humor and its cruelty is on full display. Watson captures this perfectly, reminding us that for Jedi, lessons are rarely neat, rarely safe, and rarely just theoretical. In short, the Trial of the Jedi may be a small in scope story, but it's mighty in implication. It's a miniature epic of patience, impulsiveness, and the beginning of a relationship that will utterly shape the fate of the Republic. From a certain point of view, it's one of the most essential stops in the Jedi Quest series. A quiet, intense story that proves that you don't need an army of clones or a Death Star to explore the heart of the galaxy. And that brings us to the end of our journey on Rangoon 6. Obi-Wan and Anakin have survived bounty hunters, harsh terrain, and each other, at least for now. They've learned lessons in trust, patience, and most importantly, the uncomfortable truth that sometimes even Jedi exercises can go spectacularly wrong. The Trial of the Jedi is a quiet story, but it leaves lasting impressions. It reminds us that the galaxy's smallest worlds can teach the biggest lessons. That the bonds between Master and Apprentice is forged not in comfort, but in challenge. Next time on the Skywalker Files, from a certain point of view, we'll be moving forward in the Jedi Quest timeline to the Dangerous Games. This is a story where Anakin is pushed even further into a galaxy-wide competition that will test his skills, his confidence, and inevitably his ego. Expect high-stake trials, clever sabotage, and the kind of perilous antics that Obi-Wan will quietly have to manage with his usual mix of exasperation and restraint. So tighten your utility belts and double check your lightsabers, because the next adventure promises not just action, but insight into how Anakin's confidence begins to tip toward recklessness, a trait that, as we know all too well, will have consequences down the line. Until then, remember, when a Jedi says it's just a training mission, it's probably not. This has been Rockwell with the Skywalker Files, saying, may the Force be with you, always.